Magical Tales from Mystic India. Oral Tradition from the Indus. Written by JFA McNair, Thomas Lambert Barlow. Narrated by Susilo. The Guru and his Greedy Disciple. In former years there lived a very learned old Guru, or spiritual teacher, and he had 5 very earnest disciples who had become so imbued with his knowledge and so attached to his person that they agreed to follow him wherever he led the way, even if it were to travel all the country round. "Well," he replied, "if I do leave this enamored spot where I have spent most of my life, we shall all have to undergo many privations, and perhaps hardships. But I confess, I have now a thirst for seeing more of the world. So will you go with me under the prospect of such circumstances?" "Yes," they said, "we certainly will. And no matter what frowns of fortune come upon us, we shall at least gain knowledge every hour that we are in your company." He then proposed that they should visit the various Hindu shrines and the places that had been hallowed by old associations connected with the founders of their faith. To this they readily consented, and having sought for a propitious day, they set forth on their travels. They had visited many holy places consecrated by age and sanctity, and as they were everywhere made welcome by devotees of their religion, they had few deprivations to encounter. One day they were approaching a very populous city where a devout Hindu king resided, and the Guru said to his disciples, "I am much fatigued by the journey. Go you all into the city, and buy bread, and return to me here." For he had determined to rest under a large clump of trees just outside the city walls. It was not long before they all returned to the Guru with a wonderful account of the city. "For," said they, "we have never known so remarkable a place, for strange to relate, every article of merchandise is of the same price. In every shop and market, all the goods are of one and the same value: gold, silver, precious stones, wheat, fruit, vegetables, and indeed everything that man can wish for and want can be had for the same sum." The Guru said, "You much surprise me. And although I am very tempted to see for myself such a wonderful place, yet I am convinced that such a state of things must bring about great laxity and vice, and that justice there must be at a very low ebb, for that too, I suppose, is classed with the other commodities. No, let us at once quit this city, and make the best of our way to some other more inviting place." Whereupon they all agreed to accompany the Guru, but one disciple, a tall, strapping fellow, and fond of the good things of this life, said that on second thoughts he would like to spend 2 or 3 days in that city, and that he would join them some marches off if they would only promise to go by easy stages. It was in vain that the Guru tried to dissuade him from his purpose. He had made up his mind, so he parted company with his fellows and went off alone into the city. He had not been there more than 2 or 3 days when a burglary, attended with murder, was committed in the city, and the Kotwal, or chief police officer, began to set on foot enquiries as to the whereabouts of the perpetrators of the crime. He came across this disciple of the Guru, and finding that he was a strong, powerful fellow, and a stranger to boot, he was at once taken up on suspicion, and very soon witnesses were found who had seen him loafing about the place, and he was there and then tried for the crime, condemned and sentenced to death, and the death was confirmed by the king in due course. This avaricious, this greedy disciple was then cast into prison to await his execution, and bitterly did he repent that he had not followed the advice of his Guru. Thus, mourning over his fate, he aroused the sympathy of his gaoler, who good-naturedly offered to send a message to tell his Guru what had happened to him, and to bid him return. This messenger went off in great haste, and managed to come up with the Guru and his party at no very great distance from the city. He gave them a full and distinct account of all that had passed, and how his disciple had been tried and sentenced to death. But, he added, the day of execution was not fixed when I left the city. He told the Guru, moreover, that the king always made it his business to be present at all times when there was capital punishment to be carried out. The Guru and his disciples then hurriedly returned with the messenger to the city, and when they entered the walls, they ascertained that the execution had been arranged for the day following. When the morning broke, they hastened to the place of execution, and all the city turned out to witness it. The Guru shortly after saw his disciple surrounded by a number of police being brought from the prison. He at once accosted the chief officer and asked his permission to say just a word or two to the prisoner before his death. It was not usual to allow this, but as he was a Guru and a spiritual teacher and held in great reverence by all Hindus, leave was granted him to do so. He had only just time to say to his disciple, "See what you have brought on yourself by your greediness and avarice. And now, do as I tell you. When you see me prostrate myself before the king, call out at the top of your voice, 'No, I will not suffer my holy Guru to die for me. I must and will die, so go on with the execution.' Mind you do this, for I intend, as I prostrate myself, to offer my life in exchange for yours." He had scarcely spoken the words when there was a stir amongst the people, for the king was approaching, and now the king had reached the spot prepared for him, and with him was a large concourse of nobles and courtiers, indeed a goodly retinue, accompanied with all the pomp and displays so essential to all Oriental potentates when they move from their palace in state and on public occasions. As soon as the tumult had ceased, the Guru approached as near the presence as he dared, the people making way for him as he was a Guru. He then bowed in submission, and made the usual obeisance, and asked leave to speak. When the prisoner saw his Guru prostrating himself before the king, he called out in a loud voice the very identical words that he had been instructed by his Guru to pronounce. The king was beyond all measure astonished, for he heard the prisoner's words distinctly, and motioning to the Guru to come nearer, His Majesty said, "This is a most remarkable thing. I have never known anything before like this to take place at an execution. You, a learned Guru of our faith, offer your life as a substitute for the prisoner's, and the prisoner asks to die at once and seeks no mercy. It is usual rather for one condemned to death to solicit pardon at my hands. Can anyone solve this mystery?" And turning to his nobles and courtiers, he sought for a reply, but none was then given. Then appealing to the Guru, His Majesty said, "Can you interpret this wonderful procedure, for it passes man's understanding?" Whereupon the Guru said, "Yes, O king, I can. For is not this the very day, and almost the very hour of the day, when by our ancient Sanskrit Vedas it has been foretold that whosoever on this day and hour shall suffer death, or die in a public place, shall in very truth be transported to endless happiness and bliss?" "Is it so?" responded the king, and then summoning to his side his own learned Gurus, who in his belief could work miracles and forgive sins, he demanded of them if such had been predicted. Quite oblivious as to what was passing in the king's mind at the time, they one and all replied, "True, O king, such is the record." Then, turning to his vizier, he commanded that the prisoner should at once be set free. "For," said His Majesty, "I now see that fate has reserved for me this propitious opportunity, that I myself should obtain the spiritual rewards promised in our sacred writings. Behold me, then, all of you, the substitute, and not the Guru." Whereupon he drew his kutan, or dagger, from his belt, and plunged it into his breast. So died the devout king of this wonderful city, and was gathered to his fathers, to the unutterable grief of all his court and people. The Donkey Man and the Precious Stone. The sun had gone down one day in the Mohammedan village of Huzro, in the Hazara district, and it had become too late to work and too early for sleep, when the young men and others in the village congregated together to while away the time by narrating tales of the past. Though really a Mohammedan village, there were several Hindu shops there, and some of the Hindus joined the company. It was not long before one of the number was encouraged to tell a tale, and he began by saying, "Yek vela," once upon a time. And then he stopped. Then there was a general laugh, and he made bold to begin again, and then said, "Many years ago there was a donkey man, a poor man who used to carry grain from place to place somewhere in the Punjab. One day as he was crossing a small river, he picked up a stone of a reddish color, and as it looked pretty and out of the common, he thought he would keep it. And so to preserve it he tied it onto the neck of his best donkey, and there it hung as a sort of ornament. He did not know it was a gem, you see, but only thought it was a nice-looking stone, and that he had never seen one like it before. As he journeyed on with his donkeys, he had to cross the Chenab River, and went down to the ferry, where he got into conversation with the ferryman while they were all waiting for sufficient passengers and goods to cross the stream. Looking at the donkeys, the ferryman came at last to the donkey with the ornament on his neck, and he said to the grain carrier, "Where did you find this pretty stone?" He told him that he was crossing the bed of a little river and saw it. The ferryman looked at it again, but he did not know that it was a precious stone, yet he wanted it to decorate one of his oars. So he said to the donkeyman, "You do not seem to care much for the stone. Give it to me, and I will take you and your donkeys across for nothing." So the donkeyman agreed, and the ferryman tied it onto his oar, and kept looking at it as he went on with his work, singing his usual song and beating time with his feet. Some days after this, a jeweler, or johari, was crossing by the ferry, and his eye at once caught sight of the stone on the ferryman's oar, and taking a look at it, for the ferryman was rather proud to exhibit it, he in a moment became convinced that it was a ruby of very large and unusual size, and he made up his mind that before he left the ferry, he would get it into his possession in some way or another. He was in fact quite excited about it, and feared that at any moment it might drop into the water and be lost. But he was a cunning man, and did not show his feelings, but said quietly to the ferryman, "That is a very pretty sort of stone you have on your oar. Are you not afraid to lose it? Will you sell it to me?" Now the ferryman was not quite sure that he was a jeweler, or he might have been on his guard, but thought him to be only an ordinary traveler, and he too was almost as ignorant as the donkeyman. The jeweler said to him, "You might turn it into rupees." "Well, some day I shall, perhaps, when I want money," said the ferryman, "but it is not worth very much, and I got it from an old donkeyman for taking him across the stream one day." When they got to the opposite shore, the jeweler said before leaving, "I will give you 5 rupees for that stone." "No," said the ferryman, "I don't want money now." "But," said the jeweler, "if I give you 10 rupees, and I am not coming this way again, you had better take it." To this the ferryman agreed, and the jeweler obtained possession of this precious and valuable ruby for so small a sum as 10 rupees, and he went away very rejoiced at his bargain. When the jeweler got home, he handled it over and over again, and felt sure that he had got a great prize. So he folded it in several rags, folds of rag, as the custom of lapidaries or jewelers is, as you know, and put it very carefully by in a little box, where he kept his best jewels. It happened a year or 2 after this that the Raja of the country, not far from where the jeweler lived, wanted some precious stones for a new chair of state, or takht, and he sent his trusted messengers to all the jewelers round the neighborhood to make enquiries for gems, and especially for rubies. The messengers came to the jeweler who had the stone I have been telling you about, and they asked him whether he had any fine stones to sell. At first the jeweler said, "No, my friends," for he feared that the Raja might take his jewels by force. But when they told him not to be afraid, for the Raja was very rich, but was in need of precious stones for his chair of state, the jeweler went to his little box, and bringing to them the stone that he had set such value upon, he proceeded to untie and unwind the soiled rags one by one in the presence of the messengers. When he had untied the last rag, what was his grief and agony of soul to find that the precious ruby was in two distinct pieces. He gazed in amazement for a little, when suddenly in the hearing of them all a voice came from the broken ruby, saying, "Now, behold, I have on purpose made myself of no value or service to you. When I was on the donkey's neck, I was in the hands and charge of one who knew not my real value. When again I was on the ferryman's oar, he was just as ignorant of his treasure. When I came into your hands, you knew well my worth. You estimated my price at 5 to 10 rupees only. Learn, therefore, not to undervalue what is good for a mean and selfish object, nor to disparage your best friend, or you will live to rue the day and repent as bitterly as you now do and will do for the remainder of your life." The Fakir and the Bans. Many years ago there lived in a village on the banks of the Indus River an old fakir by the name of Shah Bilawal. Like most of his class, he was living a life of mortification, frequently torturing himself, and the few garments that he wore were rotten and dirty. This old fakir was one day crossing the river Chenab in a boat with a number of other persons who were also bound for the other side. After the boatman had pushed off and had got well into the stream, they all fixed their eyes on the fakir, who they thought was a madman, for his appearance made him look like one. Some of the company in the boat belonged to a class called Bans, and the boatman said to them, "Cannot some of you perform some act that will please the spirit of the river, Khwaja Khizr, so that we may reach the opposite shore in safety?" Upon this, some of the Bans began to snigger and laugh at the fakir, and tried to ridicule him in every possible way. But Shah Bilawal, who was a devout man after his class, passed all their sneers away, and took no notice of them. Mockery, however, in Oriental philosophy, and in the traditions of all people, we know is looked upon with contempt. A voice came to the fakir, "Are these mockers to be destroyed?" And he replied audibly, "No, make them sensible people to respect their Allah, the Almighty." Before they had arrived at the opposite shore, they desisted from their fun and frolic, and paid all due respect to the fakir, and became his followers ever afterwards. In the course of time they all died, and their graves are to be seen in the village of Lalian, in the district of Jang. The miserly Muslim priest and his wife. In a village situated on the banks of the Indus, the Abasena, or Father of Rivers as it is called, there dwelt many years ago an imam, or mullah, a president of the mosque who had come to be much respected by the people for the constant and regular manner in which he officiated, and walked closely in the ways of the Prophet. In his time, many used to go to mosque who never went before. This imam had his fees, of course, for the performance of nikahs, or marriages, and other rites of the Mohammedan faith, some of which he bestowed on the sick and poor. On festival days, besides an increase of fees, he generally received clothes and other articles from the faithful, so that, in point of fact, he made a rich harvest. Toward the latter end of his days, however, this imam contracted habits of stinginess, yet he never failed to preach liberality to others, and above all, the giving of alms to the sick and poor. He would tell the faithful, "You must always give what you can, and if you have no money, give them of the food you prepare for yourselves, and ever remember," he said, "that those who do this the most exactly will obtain the best blessings, and if you give them dishes of a savory nature, so much the greater merit, and so much the better for you." This imam had but one wife, devoted to his interests in every way, and with the strongest belief in her husband's sanctity and sincerity, and she looked up to him as her spiritual guide and teacher. She had noticed for some time, however, how niggardly he was becoming, and her neighbors had also remarked this to her. "But," they said, "he never ceases to preach to us, to give dainty dishes to the poor." All this distressed the wife, so she made up her mind that she would try one day to hear what the imam actually did preach to the people. Now the mosque was situated on the roadside, and there was an open window to that side. And as his wife knew that she could not be admitted to the mosque, she made up her mind to listen at the window. One day when she got there quite unperceived, she saw the imam with his face toward Mecca, and he was telling the people just as the neighbors had told her, that whatever you do, give alms to the poor, and nice dishes when you can, for this will bring you a blessing at the last. When she heard this, she said to herself, "If this is so, and I believe it, I make a vow from this day forward to send nice dishes to the poor, for I am not going to be behind others in this duty." Whereupon she at once prepared and cooked daily such dishes as she could, and then sent them to the poor living round about her. And sometimes she would spend a good deal of money in the purchases she made for the cooking of pulao and paratha, sweet pudding and cake. This she had continued to do for some time, when one day her husband returned from the mosque a little earlier than usual, and she was herself a little late and coming into the house, and seeing the dishes ready and on a tray, he thought that they had been sent as a gift. Opening the covers, he exclaimed, "O Mother of Muhammad, we are indeed in luck's way. Who in the name of fortune can be the blessed of the faithful who has sent us such a savory meal? Why, here is pulao and cakes, and I do not know what beside. What a delicious feast!" "No one, sir," replied the wife, "has sent this, but I have prepared it for the poor." "What?" said he. "Of our money? And what have you spent, pray?" He became very angry, and she could only wait till he was quiet. Then she said, "Did you not preach to the people, and I dare say do so still, that those who give dainty dishes to the poor shall be blessed hereafter? Did you not say that prayer carries us halfway to Allah, fasting to his palace gates, but only almsgiving gets us in?" "Yes, I have heard you say so myself." He replied, "You wretched woman, how and when did you hear this? And if you did hear it, my advice was for others, not for ourselves. I never meant that we were to send to others, but that others were to send to us. And you must stop this waste at once. Do you hear me?" "Yes, I hear you, but I cannot stop it now, for I have made a solemn promise and vow that I will continue this to my dying day. You have said, and I always believe what you say, that the best blessings attend those who give dainty dishes to the poor, and you do not want me to be blessed, eh?" The imam then said, "If you go on in this way and spend my money, I shall be ill." And sure enough, he did not rise the next morning in time to go to the mosque, a duty he had not failed in for years. His wife went to rouse him, but he would not get up. At last she said, "All the people will be waiting for you." "I cannot help that," he replied. "But if you will break your wicked vow, I will at once get up and go to the mosque." "No," she said, "I have already told you I will on no account break my vow, and all your talking will never shake my purpose." "Well then," said the imam, "I shall certainly take to my bed and die." "Then die you must," said she. "But remember that if you do not go to the mosque, they will put in some other man instead of you, and you will be the loser." This, however, had no effect upon him, and when she went again to see him, he once more asked her to break her vow, and she as steadily refused. She then left him for the night, and the next morning when she went to see him, he was to all appearances dead, and failing to get any response, she called in her friends and neighbors, who pronounced that he had truly passed away. and then they sent up the usual cries and lamentations in such cases. The day following, according to custom, the body was washed, covered with a shroud, and laid ready on a bier, and shortly after carried to the cemetery or kuburistan under a chorus of mournful voices, saying there is no deity but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. The wife contrived to secrete herself in the procession, for she well knew that no woman could go to the graveside, and when the bier was waiting, after the funeral prayers of takbir and dua had been said, she came to the front and asked to have one more look at her husband. The funeral service contains 4 tukbirs, creeds, and the dua, blessing. Those round about the body were for moving her away, but others cried, "Let her be! Let her be!" Going near the bier, she whispered, "You are just going into the grave. You had better think better of it." "So I will," he replied softly, "if you will break your vow." Drawing her lips tightly together, she gave a final "No," and then called out at the top of her voice, "Friends and neighbors, this is the time for charity. You see, my husband is dead. Now, go to my house and take away what things you like. I shall not want them any more, and they are of no further use to your old imam." She had scarcely uttered these words when the imam rose from the bier like a ghost, scaring away many of the sorrowing mourners nearby. "Wait," he cried out. "Release me. I am not dead, but only in a trance. Hear ye, all of you, what this wretched woman says, and mark well her extravagance and waste. When I lived with her, she squandered my money, and now, when I was on the point of being buried, she gives away my possessions. She shall not, however, have her way now with what I possess at my death. Do what she will with the money bag while I'm alive." It was some time before the people could be reconciled to the belief that their old imam had come to life again. But when they were, he was taken back amid much wonder and rejoicing. He appeared again at mosque and lived for some time afterwards, determined to defy his wife as to the disposal of his goods after death, while she gained her wicked will in regard to his property while alive, and continued to send her savory dishes to the poor. So, you see, my friends, it was the woman, after all, who won the day. The King's Son, His Friend, and the Fakir. In another hujra in the village of Tuvi on the left bank of the Indus, the young men of the place had collected one day, as was their custom, when one of their number called for a tale, and very shortly the well-known narrator of the village began by saying, "There once was a great king, a very great king, an earthly king, for this great king has gone to his dust long ago. But the greatest king of all is above. The king I am going to tell you about lived in ancient times, and he looked after his country very well, and had about him some clever ministers. But he was not happy in his home. He had 2 sons, the younger being very fair and good-looking, and the king had them trained in all manner of learning that they might succeed him in the kingdom. Unfortunately, this younger son became at times very riotous, and offended his father on many occasions. And though only a youth, he became so disobedient and troublesome that his father decided on banishing him from his palace. One morning when the sun arose, he found that his shoes were aputta, or turned the wrong way. So he knew from that he was to be turned away from home. At a loss to know what to do, he went to his best friend and told him what had happened. And after consulting together, they said, "We must at once fly this country and seek our fortune in another country." So, providing themselves with money and horses and provisions for a few days, they mounted their horses and set off on their journey, not knowing where to go. They took the high road for some miles, and then, lest they might be pursued, they struck off into the jungles, and night coming on, they picketed their horses under a tree and slept up the tree themselves for fear of wild beasts. This they continued to do for several nights, wandering through the jungles in the daytime. one evening they noticed at some little distance what they thought to be smoke. So they pushed on in the hope of finding some assistance and welcome in the dreary woods of the forest. All of a sudden they came upon a hut surrounded with trees and brushwood, and hearing no sound, they thought that it had been deserted. But listening very attentively, they overheard the groans of a man, as if in pain. Dismounting, they opened the little door of the hut, and there they saw a very old fakir, bent almost double, and like to a bundle of rags, and lying on a sort of raised place in the corner. "Ara, kaunahai," he called out, which means, "Who is there?" They then told him that they were benighted in the jungles, had consumed all their food for themselves and their horses, and were about to seek their fortune in the king's country, which was somewhere hereabout, they thought. "Can you please give us first some food, and then point us out the way to the king's country?" Upon this, the old fakir scrambled off his bedplace, and by the light of the small fire, he looked at them very narrowly, and at last he said to the king's son, "Bucha, son, I will see what I can do for you." Presently, he went a little distance outside his hut, and blew a sort of whistle, and in less than no time, a whole troop of langurs, large monkeys, came hurriedly down from the trees, chattering amongst themselves and looking up into his face. "Go, 10 of you, at once," he said, "to the nearest village, loot it, and bring food for these travelers, and corn for their horses." Without more ado, off went a party of them in great haste, and in a very short space of time back they came with food and corn, and put it down at the feet of the fakir, who seemed to speak a word of encouragement, and they departed. After feeding their horses and refreshing themselves with a little food, the travelers were about to take their leave of the old fakir and trust themselves again to their wanderings, when the fakir said, "No, you must not go without protection." So saying, he gave another whistle, and more langurs came, and detaching about 20 of them, he told them to go before the travelers, to put them on the high road leading to the king's country, and then slightly raising his voice, he said, "And mind you, do not go beyond your boundary." Taking a kindly leave of the fakir, the travelers left the hut, guarded with this escort of langurs, who first on the ground, and then on the trees in front, seemed to point out to them a way through the jungles. After they had threaded their way for a considerable distance, until it was about the dawn of the morning, the langurs began to pause, and then all of a sudden they came to a dead stop. So the travelers knew that they must have come as far as their boundary. Shortly afterwards they heard a great stampede amongst the trees, and all their langurs dispersed in an instant. Then there seemed to be a great fight going on amongst them everywhere about, and screams of the most unearthly nature, such as they had never heard in their lives before. Morning then coming on, they pressed their steeds towards an opening in the jungle, and soon reached the high road. And so on they went at an easy pace, until they saw in the distance the walls and smoke of a great city and the towers of a great palace. Arriving at the gates, they went in, and proceeded at once to the palace, and asked to be taken into the royal presence. Ere long they were ushered before the king, and narrated their adventures, which both interested and amused him very much. The king was pleased to give them service under him, and they remained at his court for some years. Not receiving any news of their own country, they obtained leave from the king to visit it. Upon their return thither, they went at once in some fear to the palace, expecting that the anger of the king might still be poured out upon them. But when they told their story, the king received them back in favor, and gave to his son an office in the state, and promoted the friend who had been his companion through their travels. The son, then bethought him of doing something in return to the kind old fakir who had befriended them in the jungles, and he sent a party to persuade him to come to the palace to live near him. The fakir declined to leave his hut, so the party returned. At last the king's son went himself, and took with him a palki or covered carriage, and brought off the fakir to his palace. He gave him a beautiful room with Persian carpets on the floor and all other luxuries, and hoped that he might spend the few more years he might have to live in every possible comfort. But the old fakir felt everything very distasteful to him, and the more the king's son tried to make him at ease, the more distressed the old man became, so that in the end the prince had to allow him to return to his hut in the jungle, where he had spent nearly all his life with the langurs as his friends. In course of time, the news was brought to the king's son that the old fakir was dead, so he and his friend had him conveyed to the city, where he was buried in great pomp, and afterwards a noble shrine was erected to his memory, and a yearly visit was ever afterwards paid to it by the king's son and his devoted friend. Sekundur Zulfkurnain. Sekundur, Alexander the Great, of curly locks like horns and fiery eyes, for such is the translation of Zulfkurnain, came to India, you know, a great many years ago. He came to conquer, but his principal reason for leaving his country was in order that he might drink of the water of life, which he had been told was to be found in the hills of India. For a very long time he wandered about in northern India, but could not discover any tidings about this water of life, till one day, after conquering a special tribe of people, he demanded of them where the spring could be found. They replied that they had heard about it as somewhere in the hills above where they resided, but that they had never been there, and they added that no one could get there, for that the spring could only be approached through a number of winding passages in the jungle, and there was the fear of never getting back, even if you could succeed in reaching it. Sekundur said to them, "Well then, cannot you tell me what I can do, for I have come all this way to drink of this water?" They replied they could only suggest to him that if he could procure a mare that had recently foaled, and could picket the foal at the entrance to the winding paths, he might ride the mare to the spring, and that she would be sure, from the love of her foal, to bring him safely back to the entrance. This plan Sekundur adopted, and eventually reached the spring from whence was bubbling up the water of life. He stooped down, and had taken up some of the water in his 2 hands, joining them together like a cup, and was about to raise the water to his lips when he heard a noise like "Gur! Gur!" several times repeated, and looking up he saw a large raven perched on a rock and shaking its head and crying out in a human voice, "Don't drink! Don't drink! Look at my piteous plight! See what a state I have come to by drinking this water! Only a mass of skin and bone, and not a feather left, and so I have been for many years, and shall never die." Upon hearing this, Sekundur threw back the water into the spring and cried out, "Ya Nusib! Ya Nusib! Oh, my fate! And so I am not to drink the water of life after all my efforts to do so. What shall I do? And I must believe this raven the bird of fate and omen." Sekundur then remounted the mare and retraced his steps, and as the villagers said, true enough, she had no difficulty in wandering in and out amongst the paths till she came again to her foal. He then returned to his camp, very sorrowful, and in order to relieve his mind he used to take long walks alone, and always dressed in the plainest garb. He had gone a long distance from the camp when one day he met some villagers, and found out from them that there were 2 wonderful trees near their village, which had the magic power to answer questions put to them, and that their replies were always quite correct. They said, But we must get old men to go with you, for they do not understand young men, nor do young men understand them." This they did, and when Secundur was approaching the trees, there was a voice heard, "Here comes Secundur, the great King Secundur." Whereupon the villagers fell down at his feet to ask his pardon, for they had thought him all along as a common traveler. Secundur at once allayed their fears and said, "Never mind, put to the trees the questions I ask you." And he said, "Ask how long I have to live." And the reply came, 7 years. "Ask again, how long will it take me to return to my country?" And the reply came again, 7 years. "Oh, sorrow upon sorrow," said Secundur. "It is not my kismut, fate, to drink the water of life, and now it is not my kismut to see again my mother, for I am sure to be delayed on my way back to my native land." Upon return to his camp, he ordered that it should be moved the next day, and march in the direction of his own country. He had not made many marches when he came to a town, and the people came out to meet him, asking him to deliver them out of the hands of freebooters who were continually raiding upon them. Secundur remained with them for some time, and taught them how to build a wall round the town. But all this delayed him on his way back, as he thought it would. Being still very sorrowful, he sent one day for 2 or 3 of his ministers, and said to them, "My home is yet a long way off, and who can tell whether I shall live to return to it? So I am going to give you a command, and you are to write down what I say. And should I die suddenly, the letter which you shall write at my dictation, and which I will sign, and which you will keep, shall be at my death sent to my mother, and delivered into her hands. Now write as follows: From your son Secundur. I am near dying, and have had this letter written to you, and have signed it myself. It is the custom of this country that when a person dies in a family, cooked bread is always given away in charity to the poor, for it is supposed to do good to the deceased. Now, I am going to ask you, when you hear of my death, only to give cooked bread in charity to those who have never lost a relation. Again, should you ever come to the place of my burial and call out Secundur Zulf Kurnain, I will reply to you from my grave. Now the first request was so designed because Alexander knew that his mother could not find a family that had not to mourn some loss or other, and she would thus come to see that she was not alone in her grief, and that all human beings were afflicted with the death of relatives. As the tale goes, said the narrator, Secundur did die, and was buried, and the letter was sent to his mother. Just prior to his death, however, he called before him all his ministers, and said, When you are carrying my corpse to the grave, let all my troops of every arm of the force follow me, and outside of my shroud let one of my hands be placed with the palm uppermost. Of course, in those days, ministers never said no to the commands of the king, so they all exclaimed, Your command, sire, shall be obeyed. When they had come out of the presence, however, they said to one another, That is a singular command of the king. Whoever heard of troops following a dead general? We must really again go and inquire if these are his precise instructions. But they feared to go altogether, so deputed the favorite minister to go into the presence, who made his salam, and repeating the king's commands, asked if these were to be carried out. Send for them again, said the king. Send for all these ignorant ministers. When they came, he taxed them with their want of sense and said, Do you not see that by ordering all my troops to follow me to the grave, I wanted to show to you and to all the world that Secundur, though he conquered with such troops, they could not save him from death, and by placing my hand out of the shroud, that you and all else might know that empty were my hands when I came into the world, and empty are they when I go out of it." "O king," said they all, "now we truly comprehend the meaning." This all happened just before he died, and everything was done as the king commanded, and the letter was given into the hands of a minister to convey to his mother, as I told you. Upon receiving the letter, the mother, though borne down with her great sorrow, did not long delay before she set out to the grave of her son. Now there were many graves and many tombs in the graveyard, and she wandered up and down for a long time, calling out, "Secundur! Oh, my Secundur, my beloved Secundur!" But no reply came from the tombs. Then the thought crossed her mind that the letter had said that she was to call out Secundur Zulfkurnain. So this she did, and was at once replied to by her son, who said, "Did I not tell you to call out Secundur Zulfkurnain, for there are many Secundurs here?" "Yes, alas," she replied, and the voice then ceased to speak, and though she waited, it never spoke again. Now the design of Secundur by this was also to give his mother another reason for pacifying her grief in knowing that there were many Secundurs who had died and had been buried, and that she was not the only mother in the world who had lost a Secundur. The Farmer, the Crocodile, and the Jackal. There once was a wily old crocodile who dwelt in a tank hard by a village, and he was sometimes so ferocious that he would seize children who used to go for water there, then drown and eat them. He had become, in fact, the terror of the place. One year there was a very great drought, and the tank by degrees began to dry up, and at last got quite dry, and the crocodile was to be seen grilling and roasting in the sun. He used to call out to the passers-by, "Oh, pray take pity upon me, and shew me where I can go for water, for I am dying in this heat." "No, indeed," they all said, "we are glad to see you suffering, for have you not often made us suffer by taking our goats, and sometimes even our children? We shall not help you in any way." At last an old man passed by, and the crocodile appealed to him, and at first he replied as the others did, but afterwards he relented, and said, "Well, if you will follow me, I will take you to a tank which is never dry." So the crocodile followed him, and he shewed him a tank no great distance off, which was filled with water. The old man went first into the tank himself, and calling to the crocodile, he said, "See here how deep it is." No sooner had the crocodile had a good drink than he made a grab at the old man's leg. "Ow! Ow!" said the old man. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" "Well," replied the crocodile, "I have had a good drink, thanks to you, and as I have had no food for many days, I'm going to make a meal of you. That is what I'm going to do." "You wretched and ungrateful brute," said the old man. "Is this the way you reward me?" At that moment a jackal hove in sight, coming for a drink. The jackals, we know, are the most cunning of all animals, and the old man said, "I will put my case before him, and if he says you are to eat me, very good, so you shall." The old man then beckoned to the jackal to come close up to the tank, and telling him all the facts of the case, the jackal said, "You know I am always a just judge, and if you want me to decide, you must shew me the place from whence you brought the crocodile." So they all three wended their way back to the tank near the village, and the jackal said, "Shew me the exact spot where you first found the crocodile." And when they got there, the jackal said, "Now I am going to give you my judgment, so prepare to listen." Then turning to the old man, he said quietly, "You silly old idiot! What made you ever help a crocodile? Now you run one way, and I will run the other." The jackal gave a skip, and was soon off out of sight, and the old man took to his heels also, and soon got away. The wily old crocodile, now balked of his prey, said to himself, "I know my way back to that water tank, and I will someday have my revenge on that jackal, for he is sure to come there to lap water." So back he went, and as there were many trees near the tank, some of whose roots went beneath the water, the crocodile lay in ambush there. By and by the jackal came to drink water, and the crocodile made a sudden snap at his leg and held it. "Oh, you foolish crocodile," the jackal said. "You think you've got a hold of my leg, do you? But it is only the root of a tree." So saying, the crocodile released his hold, and the jackal jumped off in high glee out of his reach. The crocodile then determined that he would try some other plan of entrapping him. So, as there were great numbers of a small fruit falling from one of the trees, which he knew the jackal came to eat, he one night piled up a heap and hid himself beneath it, leaving only his eyes uncovered. Presently the jackal came prowling along, and noticing the pile of fruit, he felt inclined to partake of some. But he drew near very cautiously, and in a moment he caught sight of the two eyes of the crocodile glistening in the moonlight, when he called out, "Oh, I see you," and scampered off. After this, the crocodile saw that it was no use to try himself to catch the jackal. "For," said he is too cunning for me. I must employ someone who comes to get water here." So one day he saw a farmer, and said to him, "If you will catch a jackal for me, I will make you a rich man, for I will give you several jewels which people have dropped in this tank for years and years, and they are lying here at the bottom." "Oh," replied the farmer, "that is easily done." So that very night he went into the jungle and lay down as if dead. Presently the jackal made his appearance, and smelling along, he came close up to the body. Then he hesitated and said, "I wonder if this is really a dead body or not." He then called out audibly, "If it is really dead, it will shake its leg, and if it is alive, it won't do so." This he said so quickly and so artfully that the farmer was taken aback, and to make him believe he was dead, he at once stupidly shook his leg, and off skipped the jackal, saying, "I caught you there," and was lost to view in an instant. The farmer, who was very avaricious and wanted the jewels badly, made up his mind that he would by hook or by crook make sure of the jackal on the next occasion. So this time he prepared of the softest wax a doll of the size of a child, and digging a small grave and covering it over with leaves and mud, he waited in hiding to see the result. Shortly after sunset, the jackal began to prowl about as usual, and coming on the new grave, he said to himself, "Ah, this is someone lately buried. I will try my luck here." He then began to scratch with his paw, and presently one paw got caught in the wax, and in trying to get that away, all four became stuck with the wax, when in a moment out came the farmer from his hiding place and said, "Ah, at last I have got you, and you are my prisoner." The jackal yelled and howled and endeavored to escape, but he was hindered by the wax on his feet. So then he took to frightening the farmer, and said, "If you do not get me out of this scrape, I will call all the jackals in a moment of time, and they will destroy you forever. For do you not know that I am the king of the jackals?" "Oh, what am I to do?" asked the farmer. "Go," he said. "Go and get some oil and rub it all over me. Then get a fowl and tie it about 50 yards away, and bring 2 men with hatchets to stand over me, so that if I attempt to get away, they may chop me to pieces." This being done by the farmer, the jackal, while being held in his hands, sought his opportunity, and being well greased all over, he made a violent spring, and so got clear of the farmer. Then he dashed between the legs of the men with hatchets when they made a plunge at him, but they only succeeded in hurting their own legs. So the jackal got finally off, and picking up the fowl, he was soon lost to view, and so won the day. Faith opposed to magic. There is a hill in the Hazara district of the Punjab, known to all by the name of Gunkur, which in days gone by was a stronghold of banditti. It was well elevated above the plain, and on its crest there were several projecting rocks, and there were caves among the rocks. In one of these caves dwelt a Hindu fakir of the begging mendicant class, who had for a long time established himself there, and used to come out and sit on a large rock called Pirtan. This fakir had the reputation of being able to produce wonderful effects by the aid of his magic and enchantments, could cure serious diseases, and when he liked, he would say his Ram Ram song, for Rama was among the avatara of Vishnu, and he would then ascend into the skies and go completely out of sight. Such a fakir was in consequence much feared by the people of the place, and indeed in many villages round about. Most of the people living near the hill were Gujars, or Mohammedan keepers of cattle, and from whom the province of Gujarat was named. And it sometimes happened that their milk did not set properly, so they used to go to the fakir, who soon made everything right. And though he was a Hindu, and they Mohammedans, yet they went to consult him. It so happened that one day another fakir, a Mohammedan, who was on his round visiting various shrines and the relics of departed saints, came to this Ghazi village, which was situated at the foot of the hill. It was not long before he was told by the people of the wonderful doings of the Hindu fakir who dwelt on the Pirtan, how that he would cure all diseases, and above all, that he could by his magic go up into the air and depart out of sight. "He is very good, too," they said, "to us, for when our milk refuses to set, he soon makes matters right for us, and so we are going to him tomorrow morning about this very thing." "You are you?" said the Mohammedan fakir, and he was very angry with them, and said, "Now you wait, and you will see that this very night your milk will be all as it should be." True enough, when the morning broke, the milk was properly set. "Now," said the fakir, "why do you put your faith in this pagan and idolater who does not believe in Allah? And as for the stories you tell me, they are not to be credited, and what he does is by trickery and deceit." With many other words he exhorted his followers not to be imposed upon. Turning to the Hindus, he said, "If you choose to ruin yourselves, that is your affair, and not mine." His followers, however, besought him just for once to come and see if what they said was not true. He replied, "Well, you may all go, and if I come at all, it will be later on." So all the people from the village, and from the villages round about, went up to the Gungur hill to see the wonders that this Hindu fakir could do. There was a large concourse of people, so the Mohammedan fakir thought that he might slip in unperceived, and overcome too with curiosity, he had determined to see what sort of a man the Hindu fakir was who had carried off so many people as his followers. They had all gone to the Gungur hill, and the Mohammedan fakir thought, "I will go now, and see what is to be seen." On arrival there, he noticed that there was a vast assemblage of people. Looking round, he saw a knot of his own followers seated together, so he joined himself to them, and waited to see what would take place. He was not, however, unobserved by the Hindu fakir, who, after receiving an ovation from all his adherents, addressed himself in a loud voice to the multitude around, and pointing to the Mohammedan fakir, he said, "I see here a Mohammedan fakir of a false and wicked faith. And I tell him, as I tell you all, that as two swords cannot go into one scabbard, so neither can two fakirs live in one and the same spot. And he that proves himself to be master, let him hold the hill." The enthusiasm was very great when he had uttered these words, and his own people called out, "Ascend, O fakir, and put this new man to shame." He replied, "I will, and if he can surpass me in that, I will give place to him, and go away, and leave you." Whereupon, divesting himself before them all of his garments, with the exception of his waistcloth, and repeating audibly his juntur muntur, 2 Sanskrit words meaning incantation, and some other words of enchantment, and then kindling a small fire, he made some passes over it, and in the smoke that it made he gradually rose and vanished out of sight. "Ah, there goes our wonderful fakir," said all the Hindus, "and as for this other wretched man, he does not look as if he could do anything wonderful." In a measure they were right, for the Mohammedan fakir, when he witnessed his ascent, was at his wits' end to know how to prevail against such a rival. Collecting, however, a few of his own followers around him, he drew out his Koran from its case. Then, opening it with great caution and solemnity, he took off the shoe from his right foot and threw it into the air with all his might. To the bewilderment of all, the shoe did not return, but seemed to go also into the skies whither the Hindu fakir had gone. The Hindus then raised a cry, "What is a shoe compared to a man? Go up yourself, and we will believe in you." In patience did the Mohammedan fakir bear their reproaches, when suddenly there was a sound heard in the air as if someone was beating a door with the palm of his hand, and very shortly afterwards the body of the Hindu fakir came in sight, and as it descended, there was seen over his head the shoe of the Mohammedan fakir, which in some unaccountable way was slapping the head of the Hindu fakir and beating him down to the earth. And when he came to the ground, he fell at the feet of the Mohammedan. Stunned and confused, the Hindu made a rush for his cave, and holding up his hands he repeated audibly some words of enchantment, and then fled precipitately into the jungle, and left that countryside forever. This story is told by the Mussulmen in their huzras as a proof that faith will always in the long run crush and destroy the power of myth and magic. And the moral is that Allah is pure and spotless, and there is none righteous as He. The Fakir and his quarrelsome wife. In a somewhat out-of-the-way village in the Punjab, there dwelt for many years an old fakir who was renowned for his wonderful self-denial and abstemious habits. He was not one, who assumed their garb merely, but he preached to others of truth and morality, and his character bore out all he taught. He did not wander about, but took up his residence in this village. And so, being always there, he came to be well known, and was often visited by many people from distant parts. One day, another fakir of the same branch and order as himself, who was journeying north, came and claimed friendship with him, and finding him in a special place where he usually spent his day, sat down near to him, and talked of the things that concerned them both. It being near nightfall, the old fakir asked his brother of the same faith to come as his guest for the night, and to pursue his journey on the morrow. So they trudged together until they arrived at his hut. But when the wife saw the guest, and knew that he was going to stay the night, she grew much displeased with her husband, and very abusive. It was in vain for the old fakir to say that his friend was a traveler, and of his own avocation. The wife refused to be appeased. The guest, finding himself in an awkward position, asked his host whether he had not better go on his journey at once, or find a refuge somewhere else in the village for the night, for it gave him great pain to listen to the angry words of a woman. "Oh, no," said the host, "I know. She is very ill-tempered and cross, and frequently gets put out. But I have a great respect for her all the same, and I must tell you the reason. You do not know that I am widely known as a good man, and in consequence of this, and of the advice I give, I am visited by people far and near, and they all flatter and praise me to the skies. Sometimes I have thought to myself that if this were to continue, I should be in danger of being proud and puffed up, and so be ruined not only here, but hereafter. Now, this wife of mine, when she fans herself into a passion, does me real good, and I become quite subdued, and the more turbulent she becomes, the more I control myself and am quiet. So you see there is a balance established between us, and the effect on me is that it softens my nature, and I am made more and more what we fakirs aim to be. So what I lose in one way, I gain in another and a better way." The guest remained the night and went away the next day deeply impressed with the wisdom of his friend and brother. The Farmer and the Revenue Soar. You all know that in certain parts of our country, the farmers are in the habit of shifting their hamlets from time to time according to the seasons. In wintertime they go to live in the big villages, and in the summer they dwell in the fields near to their crops. One summer day, a farmer was plowing his ground, which was situated not far from a kuburistan or burial ground, and a revenue soar came up and accosted him, and asked if the farmer would direct him to a village where the people were all together, in order that the rents might be collected. "The only place that I know of," said the farmer, "where they keep together is in that place," pointing to the burial ground. "This," said the soar, "is no answer, sir, to my question. What do you mean?" and roundly abused the farmer, and struck him with his chabuk, or whip. "Well," said the farmer, "it's quite true. Whenever anyone goes to that place, he never moves again. But we farmers always move from place to place according to the seasons." The revenue soar was a little impressed by his attempt at wit, and was about to ride off, but overhearing the farmer saying something audibly, he listened, and these were his words: "It was green and full, and set with pearls. In the Raja's garden she stood, and was covered with a shawl." The soar said to the farmer, "I overheard what you were repeating, but what can possibly be the meaning of it? For it is a riddle, surely. So please enlighten me." The farmer replied, "I gave you one piece of knowledge, and you became angry and violent. However, I will return you no ill will. So here is the answer to take away with you. Don't you see that it refers to the butta, or ear of the Indian corn? Its stem is green, its grain like pearls, and its covering sheath like a beautiful shawl." Farmers, you see, have their bits of wit, and then he added to the soar, "I may tell you 100 tales, but all are inferior to the plough, for by it the state gets its revenue, and the people are supplied with food." The soar left him, and went away impressed with his quickness and mother wit. Multan, as hot as fire. There was once a fakir of the name Shams-i-Tabriz, his first name being that for sun in the language of the Persians, and his second being that of a great city. This fakir was a very noted man, and wherever he went to reside, the people flocked to see him, and he collected in every place a large number of followers and disciples. His fame was spread abroad far and wide, and he lived so long ago that it was about the time of Shah Jahan, the emperor of Delhi. His custom was to visit the shrines and sacred places of various countries, and one day he made up his mind to go to Multan. Now, when the fakirs of Multan heard that he was approaching their city, they became much alarmed, and concerted together to keep him out of the place, for fear that many of their disciples should run after him and forsake them. They arranged, therefore, to send a messenger to meet Shams, and when the envoy came to greet him just outside the city walls, he filled to the very brim with milk a brass cup that he had in his hand, and then, addressing himself to Shams, he said, "As is this cup full to the brim with milk, so is Multan choke full with fakirs, and there is no room for you there, and I am deputed by all the fakirs so to tell you." Shams then turned about him, and noticing a jasmine flower growing on a bush hard by, he plucked it, and using great care he managed to balance it on the top of the milk without spilling a drop out of the vessel. "Now go," he said to the messenger, "and tell all the fakirs that as the flour was above the milk, so will Shams be over all the fakirs of the city. Yet he will not disturb them, even as you see the flour has not upset the milk." So off went the messenger, and gave the message to the fakirs. And they then hastily called a meeting of their disciples, and gave command that no one should give Shams aught to eat, nor prepare or cook any food that he might bring with him. On reaching the city, Shams found to his dismay that he could obtain no sustenance of any kind from the people, and though he besought many of them for pity's sake to save him from starvation, the reply was always the same: "We would do so ourselves, but are in fear of the fakirs." At last, when almost perishing with hunger, Shams went to a butcher, who so far relented that he gave Shams a piece of meat, but refused to cook it for him. Shams, in despair, then turned his eyes to the skies, and made a bitter appeal to the sun, saying, "You are Shams, and I am Shams. We are both called the sun. So I beseech you to come to my aid and cook for me this piece of meat, that I perish not with hunger." In a moment the sun heard his request, and lo and behold, he approached nearer to Multan by a spear and a half's length. And the meat was cooked by the greater heat, and the hunger of the fakir appeased. Owing to this remarkable heat, the occurrence of which the fakirs and people attributed to Shams, they all came and asked his pardon, which he readily granted, but declined to alter the position of the sun over the city. So Multan has remained from that day to this the notoriously hot place that it is known to be. It is celebrated, said the narrator, for 4 things: its heat, its dust, its beggars, and its graveyards. And this Multan has had 3 names already: Huspur, Bagpur, and Multan, and will eventually, before the end of the world, be called Trahpur Sultan. Shams continued to remain in the city, gathering together numbers of disciples, and eventually died there. A magnificent tomb was erected to his memory, which may be seen to this day. Shaitan and his savage wife. Once upon a time, Shaitan, or the devil, who, as we dwellers in India know, has the power to transform himself into man or animal whenever he pleases, one day took it into his head that he would go round the world in the garb and appearance of an ordinary traveler. And so admirably disguised was he that one day he visited one of the villages in the Punjab, and finding 2 men seated at one of their places of meeting, or husras, talking and smoking their hookah, he approached them as if to speak. Believing him to be some traveler wearied by his journey, the 2 young men asked him to sit down, and then they offered him a smoke and a drink of water. As they were talking and chatting, they heard a great noise in the village, and suddenly they saw a farmer who was being pursued and beaten by his wife. The young men recognized the woman, and at once said to the stranger, "We know the character of that wretched woman. She is worse than Shaitan himself." Whereupon Shaitan said, "No, there I cannot agree with you. For how can any woman be more hateful than Shaitan, who is the accursed one, and wears on his neck the necklace of evil?" The young man said, "Well, my friend, if you ever get married and have a wife like that woman, you will remember what we have said, and you will then think her not merely as wicked as Shaitan, but 1,000 times worse." After taking some refreshment, he pondered over these words, and bidding them salam, Shaitan went on his way. It was some little time after this when Shaitan did take unto himself a wife, and as it happened, she turned out to be a most violent woman, and used to abuse and maltreat him on every occasion, and would even go so far as to kick and beat him and torture him in a variety of ways. Their youngest and best child was a son, and she would even chastise him, and if the father remonstrated or interfered with her, he would always come in for a large share of her ire and abuse. When Shaitan had pondered over the sad plight he was in, his thoughts reverted to the saying of the young men in the village, and he said to himself, Toba, Toba, oh, tush, fie, why certainly this wife of mine is worse than the woman in the village. Yes, 1,000 times worse. Now his son began to grow up a bit of a demon in nature, and as time wore on, it was necessary that he should be given something to do. So his father one day called him aside and said, I want you to hear some advice from me. But the son replied, I know you are my father, but I could never be advised by you, for you are shaitan, and you never did give good advice to anyone. That is true, said the father, but though I know it is my way to give bad advice to all, I could not do so to my son. Come to me, at all events, and hear what I have got to say. Say on, replied the son, and I will listen. You know, Shaitan said, how you and I are maltreated by your mother, so that life is well nigh unbearable to both of us. Now, my advice to you is that you go on earth as a hakim, or doctor. The son replied, I know nothing of medicine, and how could I be a physician? That is of no consequence, said his father. You do as I tell you, and all will go right. When, for instance, you are called to see a patient, as soon as you enter the room, the first thing you do should be to look at the head of the bed, or charpai. Should you see my shadow there, you should at once say to the people of the house, Do not, I pray you, spend any more money on the patient, for he is sure to die. The people will then say, What a marvelous doctor is this, for he tells us beforehand that he knows the patient will die and will not receive any fees. By this means, your fame will become great all over the country. But if you should not see my shadow at the head of any patient's bed, then you should prescribe any simple thing which is known to the common people round about, and of course you will know from the absence of my shadow that the patient will get well, and your renown will go on increasing in this way. The son listened to the counsel, and thinking for a little, he said, Very good, I agree. And it was not long ere he began to practice his profession amongst men. True enough, in an incredibly short space of time, his fame became noised abroad, and he found himself in an extensive practice. One day it happened that the Nawab of the country where he was had a near relation very ill, and hearing of the skill of this doctor, he sent off servants and horses and carriages to bring the doctor in great pomp to the palace. Thither he went without delay, and he was received by the Nawab at the door of the palace, and after they had partaken of sherbet and had smoked a hookah, the Nawab showed the way to the room where the sick relative was. The hakim, or doctor, followed very thoughtfully and anxiously, and he was cogitating to himself, I sincerely hope that my father's shadow will not appear today over the bedhead of this most important patient, for it is everything to me that it should not, and that the patient should recover. He was taken along passages and corridors, and at last they reached the room where the sick man lay, and to his horror there was the shadow, and no mistake, and he almost collapsed on the spot. After sitting a while near the patient, feeling his pulse and asking questions in the usual way, he requested all persons to quit the room, in order that he might be alone with the patient for a little while. All this time he was thinking to himself how he could possibly expel and get rid of the shadow, his father's shadow, which now stood between him and his fortune, when all of a sudden the thought rushed in upon him, I know what I will do. So raising his voice to the highest pitch, he shrieked out, Father! Father! Mother is coming! Whereupon the shadow vanished with one rapid jump, and never again returned. As the tale runs, the patient got quite well very shortly after this, and the hakim was advanced to high honor and position in the dominions of the Nawab. Saki, the generous Muslim. In a certain village in the Punjab, there lived a long while ago a very charitable old Mohammedan of the name of Saki, which, being interpreted from the Arabic tongue, means liberal. This faithful and patient old Mussulman was famed through all the country round for his repeated deeds of charity, and he was visited by many mendicant folk who profited not a little from his kindness and hospitality. The result of all this almsgiving was that in the end he himself became very poor, or as the native translation more nearly renders it, he became as dry as a fish baked in the sun. One day, as the tale goes, two fakirs, kalundars, or begging monks as they are sometimes called, were on their way to Mecca to perform that pilgrimage which is obligatory to every devout Muslim once in his life. And on their way thither they had to pass through the village in which Saki resided. So they made up their minds to pay him a visit and obtain his blessing on their journey. As they entered the village, they accosted the first man they met and asked him to direct them to the house of the famous Saki. This man, who was no other than Saki himself, replied, "The name of names is the name of Allah, and I am named Saki." Whereupon, according to his custom, he invited them to his abode. And when they entered it, they were at once struck with the signs of poverty that were to be seen on every side. The hut, for such it literally was almost devoid of furniture, and the place was quite comfortless. Saki's wife rose at their entrance, and he then told her under a breath to set food before the travelers. But she replied, "You have given all your substance away, and nothing is left." "Kyai kuran," she said, "or what is to be done?" Saki replied, "These are holy men, and must be entertained, so pray borrow of our neighbors." Saki then followed his wife for a brief period, which gave time for the travelers to say to one another, "How poor he is, and though we are hungry, let us eat sparingly and leave some on the dish for him and his family." Meanwhile the wife had procured some atta or flour, and in a short time placed before them some chapatis or thin cakes, and they all began to eat, and Saki's daughter had a portion taken to her. After they had all eaten, the travelers rose to go, and with many salams and wishing peace and safety to the house, they were just on the point of starting, when Saki said, "I must go with you a little way, to put you on the right road, for there are many cattle tracks about the village, and you might miss your way." So saying, he accompanied them very nearly to the main road, when they finally bid him adieu, wondering most of all that though he was so very poor, he seemed to be so happy and contented. Saki now turned to go back, when to his astonishment he saw a column of smoke ascending from the village, and he quickened his pace when he met a man running to tell him that his hut had been burnt down, and that both his wife and daughter had perished in the flames. Saki, on reaching the spot, found this to be only too true, and when he could safely venture near, he saw to his horror only their charred remains, and at once cried out, "It is the will of Allah. He is one, and Muhammad is his prophet. I shall leave this place and go into the city and seek service under the king." So off he went on his journey, feeling much distressed, but confident that something good would turn up. His way led through a rather dense jungle where there were in some parts of it patches of very high grass. In one of these he thought he would rest himself, and as it was time for the midday prayer, he performed his regular devotions, and holding out his hands as usual to receive the blessing, he spoke out rather more audibly than he was wont to do, when to his utter amazement he heard a voice calling out, "Rescue us! Save us from this misery!" He then groped about in the long grass and discovered that the sound came from a deep, dry well. And looking down, he saw a man in great trouble, who must have fallen in by accident, he thought. And then peering closer, he descried also a jackal and a snake. The jackal roared out, "Take me out of this place and take out the snake, but do not take out this bad man." Saki replied with the usual generosity of his nature, "No, if I take out one, I shall take you all out." So saying, he undid his cummerbund, or waistband, and finding that it was not long enough to reach to the bottom of the well, he bent his turban onto it and lowered it down, telling the man to tie his turban onto it also. By this little contrivance he managed to get them all up to the surface in safety. The snake, to evince its gratitude, vomited from its mouth a small lump of gold, which Indian snake charmers quite believe that certain snakes can do, and asking Saki to follow him, he shewed him some wonderful herbs that would cure most of the ills that flesh is heir to, and which no man was yet acquainted with. On his return to the well, the jackal expressed his thanks for his deliverance by saying that whenever Saki was in trouble, if he thought of him, he would come to his relief. "But beware," he said, "of the man, for he will get you into distress." The man was not much concerned about thanking Saki, but as he was very weak and faint, Saki felt for him, and they journeyed on together very leisurely. Saki found out that he was going to the same city that he had set out for, and that he was in very truth the son of the king. When they neared the city, the prince said, for such he was, of course, "Give me that piece of gold I entrusted to your charge." Saki replied, "You never gave me any gold, and how can I return to you what I never received?" "We will see about that," said the prince. And they had no sooner entered the streets than the prince, who was at once recognized by the people, called out to one of the burkandazis, or armed police, "Seize this man and search him for a piece of gold he robbed from me." This they did. The gold was found upon him, and Saki was taken before the executive, found guilty, and sentenced to the torture peculiar to that country. This punishment consisted in stripping the body and placing over it the skin of a newly killed heifer, the head only of the victim being exposed. The prisoner was then put into the hot sun so that the skin might dry upon his flesh and gradually eat into it. Saki was so treated and bore all his pains with patience, and recited to himself for his comfort portions of the Koran which he had committed to memory. He was daily under the charge of a guard whose duty it was to take him to and from his prison house and to watch over him during the day. One day Saki observed that the sentry was muttering to himself and apparently in grief. So Saki asked him what was the matter, and he replied, "Our king is very ill, and none of the doctors can cure him." "Oh," said Saki, "I am a medicine man, and I can cure the king, I do not doubt." This news soon reached the ears of the people about the court, and Saki was taken before the vizier, and there repeated what he had said to the sentry. The vizier ordered that the skin should be taken off Saki, which caused him much physical pain, and indeed could only partially be removed. Saki was then put into clothes again, and leave was given him to prepare his remedies. Saki then went at once into the jungle, procured the herbs pointed out to him by the snake, and made from them a draught which he gave to the king. The king believed in his skill, continued to follow the treatment, and in a very short time he became quite cured of the disease from which he was suffering. "Now," said the king to Saki, "you have been the means of restoring me to health, and as I made an oath at the point of death, that whoever cured me should have my daughter in marriage and be possessor of half of my kingdom, so now I shall proceed to keep my word." The king accordingly commanded that the proper document should be made out, and upon a fortunate day, being fixed by the astrologers, the royal marriage was celebrated with every pomp and display. So the poor and patient Saki was thus greatly rewarded and enriched. But he was not spoilt by splendor, for he never neglected, as the proper hours came round, to say his prayers 5 times a day, as the custom is of every devout Mohammedan. The morning prayer was said at the riverside near the palace, where he prostrated himself in worship on an open green sward. One morning, the jackal whom he had rescued from the well came to him with a beautiful flower in its mouth, and he said to Saki, "Take this flower. I found it on this green bank after 5 fakirs or panj pir had been worshipping there. It has a most fragrant smell. But one thing I must tell you, let no one know you possess it." So Saki thanked the jackal, tied the flower in his waistcloth, and went home. The perfume of the flower was so strong that his wife at once perceived it, and asked what he had about him that smelt so sweet. Saki for a long time evaded the question, for he had in his mind the warning of the jackal. But at last, in a weak moment, he drew it from his waist-belt and handed it to his wife, saying, "I have yielded to your entreaties, but you must tell no one else about it." One day, her mother came to visit her, as she often did, and by some accident, Saki's wife dropped the flower on the floor, which her mother picked up unperceived, and took away with her, when it at once dried up. The wife had no sooner lost the flower than she became depressed like a mad thing, and at last told Saki that she should die unless it could be recovered. So distressed indeed was she that she quite worried him out of his life. Saki, one morning when he was at his usual place of prayer by the riverside, thought of the jackal, and he was not long before he made his appearance. He then told him all about the flower and what misery and suffering it had brought upon his wife since the day she had lost it. The jackal remonstrated and said he could not get another, for it was left on the bank by the 5 holy men who had never been seen again. But he felt sure that there was some talisman about it. Saki said, "Oh, if you could only tell me whither they went, so that I might follow them and get them to take the spell off my wife." The jackal replied, "They dived into that deep pit in the river, that I am sure of, and never rose again." Then Saki bethought him that he would also dive in there at the same spot, and see what fate and fortune might have in store for him. Thereupon he made a plunge from the bank, and oh, wonder of wonders! He found himself in a glorious place, and mid bowers of bliss, and precious stones shining in every direction, so that he was quite bewildered. This was indeed to him rapture and enjoyment, and while he was trying to collect himself, he felt a touch from someone near, and he recognized the voice of the daughter he had lost in the fire, who welcomed him with all affection, saying, "Mother also is here. I will go and call her." So Saki felt that this was true happiness indeed, to be in such a place with his first wife and daughter, and he decided to remain where he was, and which he now knew must in very truth be the paradise of Mohammed. Never more did he wish to return to earth again, to be worried by his second wife, who was under the spell of that enchanted flower. And so ends the story of Saki the Generous, and may we all learn to bear our troubles with the same patience and resignation that Saki did. The Priest, the Washerman, and the Ass. There lived many years ago in the city of Azimgur in the northwest of India a Moslem priest, or mullah, who, as is usual with that class, added to his income by teaching the Mohammedan youths of the place. By chance an old washerman or dhobi and his wife, while traveling homewards, came to the city, and put up under a tree adjoining the mosque where the priest lived, and tied their ass to the tree. The old couple were rich, but unfortunately childless. Sometime during the day of their arrival, they caught a glimpse of a man who was gesticulating before the priest in a tone of violent complaint, and they could not help hearing all he said. "You are the priest," he called out, "and I have paid you all the fees you asked, but you have taught my son nothing at all, and every day he is either idling or playing about in the dusty roads with other worthless urchins." Upon this, the priest became greatly enraged and retorted, "Not taught him anything? It is false. He has been educated like the rest. I have taught him the creed of Yahya, or the righteous ones, and though he came to me an ass, I have made him into a man. You ungrateful wretch! I will have nothing further to say to him, and you may take him out of the school." Upon this, the man left the priest and went away down the road. The ignorant old washerman and his equally old and ignorant wife, having been silent listeners of all this conversation, put their heads together and began to talk of what they had heard. The washerman said to his wife, "Did you not hear the priest say that he had changed an ass into a man? And you know priests can do wonderful things. I'm just thinking that if he could work a change in our ass and make out of him a son for us, what a blessing it would be. For we have only this one thing short of being completely happy." The old wife eagerly caught at the idea and replied, "Yes, Allah has given us much wealth, but what good will it be to us when we die? Strangers will get it, but if we had a son, he would inherit it, and our cup of joy on earth would be full to the brim. Let us go to the priest and make a bargain with him, that the curse of having no son may no longer rest upon us." Whereupon they both sought an audience of the priest, and approaching him said, "Oh, sir, we are both very old, as you see, but we have plenty of money. But, sir, saddest of all things to tell you is that we are childless. Now, sir, we overheard you say that you had transformed an ass into a man. We have an ass, but we have not a son. Could you be so good as to change him for us, and we will give you any sum that you like to name?" The priest was struck all of a heap with surprise and astonishment at this preposterous request. He said nothing for some minutes, but simply stared at the aged old couple while he collected his thoughts. These people must clearly have heard me speaking angrily to the father of the worthless scholar, and have taken my words altogether in a literal sense. But here is evidently a run of luck for me, which must not be thrown away. Thus he soliloquized, and the old couplet fixed itself into his thoughts. "These are rich in purse, but weak in intellect. Allah gives you the chance. Why should you not take it?" Then, after this little pause, he turned to them and said, "I have been considering what is best to be done for you. To comply with your request is indeed a difficult task, though not impossible. If you will tie your ass to that tree and come to me a year hence, you shall have a son, for it will take all of that time to make so complete a transformation. Give me now, therefore, 1,000 rupees and go back to your home, and be sure you return to me punctually in a year's time." The old people were only too pleased to close with the priest, so they paid him the money, tied the ass to the tree, wished him a hearty farewell, and went on their journey homewards. When a year had elapsed, the old washerman and his wife, with their hearts bounding with delight at the prospect of welcoming a son and heir, started on their travels again to meet the priest, and in due time arrived at the mosque. "We have come, sir," they said, "according to promise, to claim our son." The priest replied, "You are indeed a couple of old fools. If you had been true to your time and had come a week ago, you would have seen him. But now, owing to his great learning, he has been appointed the Qazi, doctor of Mohammedan law, at Jaunpur." The priest had hit upon this ruse, and had determined to play off a joke on this Qazi, of whom he was extremely jealous. "But," replied the old couple, getting alarmed, "how is it possible that he will recognize us unless you accompany us?" "Don't distress yourselves. I cannot go, but if you will take this rope with which you always tethered your ass, and the tobra or nose bag in which the ass had his grain, and go to Jaunpur, all your difficulties will vanish. Time your arrival in the city on a Friday at the hour of prayer in the mosque. You will see a large concourse of people being addressed by your son, who was, you know, your ass. Put yourselves in a position where the Qazi can plainly see you, then keep shaking the rope and the nose bag, and he will soon discover who you are, and come and claim you as his father and mother. So off they went to the city of Jaunpur, reached it on a Friday, and went straight to the mosque, placed themselves in a conspicuous part of the outer building within sight of the Qazi, and began, with a vengeance, to whisk before him the nose bag and the rope. In a very short time, the Qazi noticed this strange proceeding, and sent one of the congregation to find out the cause. But they told him to tell the Qazi that they had a profound secret which could only be told to the Qazi himself, and to no other mortal. The Qazi, impelled by curiosity, asked permission of his audience for a few moments of leave, and then taking the old couple aside, he begged of them to tell him the reason of their strange behavior. With bated breath, and with the deepest earnestness, did the old washerman and his wife pour into the Qazi's ear the whole of the strange story of his having once been their ass, how for years they had overloaded him with kindness, and never spared the cudgel when he had been obstinate, how they deeply regretted their conduct toward one now so exalted as they saw their son to be, how, but for the wonderful power of the priest of Azimgur, such a blessing would never have come to them, and how their cup of happiness was now complete. The Qazi at once took in the situation, and saw the plot that his arch-enemy had so cleverly planned against him. And being a wise man, he said to himself, "If I repudiate this absurd story, in the belief of which these ignorant people have bound up their lives, it will be sure to be published abroad to my own annoyance, and from being respected I shall be mocked and turned into ridicule, and in fact be the laughing-stock of the place. I am resolved what to do. I will quietly acquiesce in what they say, and so get rid of them." Turning to the old couple, he said, "Yes, it is all too true, and from henceforth your interests are my interests. Your good name is identical with mine, and I will carry it on. But let me bind you by all that you hold sacred, that you never breathe a word of this marvelous change that has taken place in my being and existence. If you never reveal the secret, I will be a dutiful son to you all my life." This the old washerman and his wife agreed to abide by in every iota, only stipulating that when they died, which in the course of nature was not far off, he would be present to see them interned according to Mohammedan rites. This the Qazi on his part faithfully promised to do, and the old couple took their departure to their own home with every expression of joy and delight, and left all their money to him when they died. Akbar and his minister. In the great and glorious days of the Badshah Akbar, or emperor, he had a very favorite minister of the name of Birbal. This minister was without doubt the ablest statesman at the court, and no state question was decided without reference to him. Some say he was also a general in the army, and that by his skill he greatly assisted Akbar to extend his dominions. Birbal was, however, a Hindu, a Brahman of the tribes of Bhat, and his real name was Mahes Das. But so tolerant was Akbar Badshah to all religious sects that if a man were wise and skillful, he cared not of what faith he might happen to be. Birbal was also full of wit and humor, and had such a pleasing way of putting things that he could talk to the Badshah in a manner that other ministers would not dare to do. It so happened, however, that one day he unwittingly gave offense to the Badshah, and so enraged did Akbar become that Birbal, fearing his wrath, fled the country. Disguising himself as a fakir, he begged his way from village to village, and at last settled down in the extreme frontier of the Badshah's empire. Days and months passed by, and the Badshah began to feel more and more the loss of his once favorite minister, and though himself searching in the villages near to hand, and making diligent enquiries everywhere, he failed to discover the slightest trace of him. Crushed by grief and broken-hearted, he at last called a council of his ministers, and stated to them how much he missed the presence about him of his old attached friend Birbal. They, perhaps somewhat jealous of his preeminence in the mind of the Badshah, seemed to be callous and indifferent as to his fate, whereupon the Badshah became as enraged with them as he had before been with Birbal, and threatened to decapitate them if his hiding-place were not soon discovered and the runaway brought back to him. The ministers and nobles in their alarm at last hit upon an expedient which they submissively laid before the Badshah. They said, "O Badshah, if an order is given throughout the empire of so senseless and foolish a nature that it will be impossible for any of your Majesty's subjects to comply with it, there is just a chance that we might be able to find out the place of concealment of the ever-terse and humorous Birbal." The Badshah listened to their suggestion, told them to act up to it, but under any circumstances and at the cost of their heads if they failed, Birbal must be brought ere long into the presence. Accordingly, an edict went forth calling upon the headmen of every village in the dominions on pain of death to bring the principal well of the village to do obeisance to the king's well at the palace. The edict was entrusted to horsemen who conveyed it to every village in the empire. The whole country was filled with lamentation and distress, for it was seen to be impossible to conform to the order of the Badshah. When the proclamation reached the village where Birbal was in hiding, he shared in the sorrow around him, and bethought him of a way of escape for the people, but he was known to them only as a fakir. At last he said to the headman of his village, "Take with you some of your principal tenants, and go to the outside of the Badshah's palace. Then send a messenger within the palace to say that in obedience to the order of the Badshah you have brought your well without the walls, and that it is ready to do obeisance to the king's well. Say also that it is the custom of the country for the elder brother to advance to meet the younger, that as soon as your well sees the king's well approaching to it through the gates of the city, it will, without delay, rise to pay its respect, and accompany it back to the palace." This they did exactly as the disguised fakir, Birbal, had told them. Arriving at the outside of the city walls, they deputed the most intelligent man of their party to present himself before the emperor. The emperor was seated on his peacock throne, having on the right of the throne a courtier carrying the golden hand to keep off the evil eye, and known as Punja for having its 5 fingers extended, and upon the left another courtier, bearing the emblem of the fish, termed in Arabic the Mahi Mur Atib, the badge of dignity and success. The messenger advanced to the throne and stated his mission to the emperor, and ended by saying that the well of his village was without the city walls, waiting to receive the king's well. The emperor was baffled for the time, and then turning to one of his ministers, he directed him to visit the delegates beyond the walls. The minister went, and at once returned, saying that the reply to the Badshah's orders and to the proclamation, given with such sagacity and wit, could come, he thought, from no other than the absent minister. This the emperor was ready to credit, and a clue being thus obtained, the ministers formed a party and proceeded to the village, where after some little time they succeeded in discovering Birbal in the austere garb of a mendicant fakir. Surprised and powerless, he was conveyed back to the city and to the royal presence, and the emperor came forward to receive him. And then, after a few formal greetings, the emperor ordered a robe of honor to be brought and put upon him, and he was again promoted to his position and rank at the court. It was not long after this that the country was at war again with the Pathans and tribes in the Bunir mountains. Birbal was given the chief command, and here, in one of the first engagements, he was unfortunately killed. but his name still lives amongst us as the most able and witty minister that the Badshah Akbar had ever called to his councils. The Raja, his minister, and the shepherd. There lived many years ago a great Raja in a country far away from our village, and he was a very enlightened and clever man, and used to travel about to add to his information and knowledge. On one of his journeys he met a man who told him that there was at no very great distance off a city where everyone was wise, from the king on the throne to the poorest beggar in the street. "That is impossible," said the Raja. But the man persisted in the truth of his statement and said, "If you do not believe me, go and see for yourself." This the Raja had determined in his own mind to do, but for the present he returned to his own palace. Calling for his favorite minister, he told him of what he had heard, and said, "I should much like to visit that city, and acquire some further experience and wisdom. For knowledge, I find, can only come from what one sees, and you must accompany me on my travels." To which the minister readily assented. Conversing again together some few days afterwards, they began to arrange about the time and manner of going. "It will not do, O king," said the minister, "for your rank and title to be known, nor indeed for me to appear as your vizier. We must throw a veil over all of this, and go in disguise, or we shall never succeed in getting to know the wisdom of this wonderful people and city. Let us go as respectable travelers only, then we shall be able to go in and out of the streets without anyone molesting us." This idea pleased the Raja, so they had some dresses secretly prepared, and on a propitious day they took their departure from the palace. The Raja knew the road, and in a few days they reached the spot where he had met the man who gave him this piece of news. "From hence," he said to the vizier, "the city cannot be far, for the man assured me it was at no great distance from where we are now standing." They pushed on, and in 2 or 3 days a city, surrounded by a high wall, was in full view before them. "This," said the Raja, "is sure to be the place, for it has an air of solidity about it. See, there are gates to go in and out of." Before, however, venturing into the city, the travelers sat down to rest on a little mound of grass just outside the walls. They got into conversation together, and observed a shepherd, or ajuri, who was grazing his goats and sheep very close to where they had sat down. The Raja said to his minister or vizier, "I should like to put to you 4 questions, just to sharpen our wits a bit." The narrator of the tale then turned, and said to his hearers, "You know that the shepherd is of all classes the most stupid and ignorant. He takes his goats and sheep each morning into the jungles, tends and feeds and guards them, and before nightfall he returns with them to the city, so he hears no information and has no means of picking up knowledge of any kind." The Raja, then within hearing of the shepherd, of whom he took no apparent concern, propounded his questions as follows to the minister. "My first question is, of all lights, which, say you, is the best light?" "Well," replied the minister, "that is not difficult to answer, for there is no light equal to that of the sun, which is indeed the center of all light." "Now, for my second question," said the Raja. "Of all waters, which is the best water?" "That again is of simple solution, for what water can be compared to that from the Ganges? For in life we Hindus worship it, and at death, when put into our mouths, it ensures to us mercy at the last." "Very good. Now, I come to my third question. Of all sleep, which is the best sleep?" To which the minister replied, "What sleep can be more refreshing than to recline on a soft couch after a fatiguing day?" "Now," said the Raja, "for my fourth and last question. Of all flowers, which is the best flower?" "This," replied the minister, "requires little thought, for the gul, or rose, has been the favorite flower from all ages. It is beautiful to look at and has the sweetest of all perfumes." After the Raja had finished his interrogations, he overheard the shepherd laughing aloud, and he thought he caught the word fool. So he turned to him and asked, "What was that you said?" To which the shepherd replied, "I was talking to my goats and not to you." "But you did say something referring to us. What was it?" "Well," returned the shepherd, "I do not mind telling you that I heard the questions you put to that man, whoever he is, and the silly replies he gave you. You asked him which was the best light, and he said the sun. No, sir, the best light is that of your eyes, for what use is the sun to you if you are blind? Again, you asked him which was the best water, and he replied that from the Ganges, the beloved Ganges. But he should have said the little store of water in a dry and thirsty land, when the far-off Ganges would be of no avail. And then you asked him of the best sleep, and how foolish his reply! He should have said the sleep of health, which will come to refresh you on whatever you may recline. And as to the last question of the flower, he praised the gul as the best of all, whereas he should have said the flower of the cotton plant, for the rose fades and leaves no useful trace behind. But with the cotton plant we have both a beautiful and fragrant flower, and when that falls off, there succeeds a pod, which supplies a substance from which we weave our cloth to provide us and our descendants after us with necessary garments." As soon as the shepherd had concluded this little speech, the Raja turned and thanked him, and then looking at his minister, he said quietly, "What think you of that for an ignorant shepherd caught haphazard near the place? And if he can make such fools of us both, who knows what may happen to us when we enter the city? What think you? Have we not had evidence enough of the wisdom of this people? So my advice is that we retrace our steps to our own country, and try and educate and improve our people, even as they have done." To this the vizier at once consented, and they journeyed homewards, wiser men than when they set out upon their expedition. The Banjara, his dog, and the banker. Once upon a time there was a banker, or Said, who lived in a large city in northern India, and being a man of great wealth was held in high repute by the Raja and people of the place. He had all the cunning of his class, and had amassed the most of his fortune by lending money at a high rate of interest, and by giving credit to men engaged in commerce. One of his debtors was a banjara, or grain merchant, who had owed him some money for a considerable time, and had paid neither interest nor any portion of that which he had borrowed. These banjaras are well-known people all over India, where they are scattered in large and small communities. They are the possessors, you know, of herds of cattle, which they employ as pack animals to convey their goods and grain from place to place. It is interesting to meet them as they wend their way from one camping ground to another, headed by the leading bullock, which is called the sainted bullock. This bullock is ornamented in every direction, the horns and pack saddle with cowrie shells, bits of scarlet cloth, peacock's feathers, and tassels of various colors, while its neck is encircled by a band of leather, carrying tinkling bells of different sounds. The banjara of this story was one day again obliged on matters of business to go to the city where his creditor, the banker, lived. So, to avoid meeting him, he encamped some distance off, and then went singly and alone to the city, in the hope that he might not come across him. Still, he was haunted with the old native saying, oft repeated, "If you have not seen a tiger, then look at a cat. And if you do not want to see the angel of death, then keep out of the way of your creditor." As ill luck would have it, however, he had no sooner got into the streets of the town than upon turning a corner he came face to face with the banker, who instantly recognized him, and carried him off to his house and demanded that immediate payment should be made. It was quite in vain for the poor banjara to sue for pity and forbearance, for the debt was an old one, and the banker both hard and unmerciful. At last the banjara bethought him of an expedient, and said, "Permit me to go to my encampment, and I will beg and borrow for my friends, and return to you with the money without fail in 3 days' time." "No, no," said the banker, "I cannot trust you again out of my sight, and by my influence here I could, get you thrown into prison. If indeed I were merciful enough to let you go to your encampment for the money, I should require the very best security." "I know no one in the city," replied the banjara. "What can I do? Oh dear, what can I do? But wait a moment. Here is my best friend, my faithful dog Kalu. Kala means black in Sanskrit. Take him as my pledge and security that I will return and pay you all I owe." Now, a banjara's dog is of a breed well known in India. He is ready of resource and of wonderful sagacity, and obedient to the voice and gesture of his master in a very marked degree. After some considerable demur, the banker at last consented to take the dog as security, and bringing a collar and chain to the banjara, he bid him tie up the dog in the yard of his house. This the banjara did, then patting and caressing his dog, he said, "Now, Kalu, remember you are not to leave this house until I come back to fetch you. If you run away you will disgrace my name, and I will never forgive you." After thus addressing his dog, he made a hasty salam to the banker, and took his departure. When the banjara had returned to his encampment, he found the packs as he had left them, still under their awning of blankets, and as it was sundown, the cattle were being picketed in a circle round the packs, and the fires were ready for the night, while the dogs were roaming about outside on their usual guard over the camp. Saluting his friends, he said, "Now, give me please a draught of water to drink. Not like the sweet water of the Sagar lake, my friends, where the firstborn of our race was sacrificed to the goddess Devi to appease her wrath for drying up the lake, but the pure crystal stream from the hills." He had soon refreshed himself with a draught, and then went round the encampment in order to collect the money due to the banker, and by early the next morning he had got together enough to liquidate the debt. In the meantime, strange things were happening at the banker's house, for on the night of the very day when the banjara had gone for the money, the house was attacked by some badmashes or thieves, who carried off several bags of rupees. Kalu gave tongue and barked loudly, but he failed to rouse the inmates, and the thieves made off with their booty. At last Kalu succeeded in breaking his chain, and he followed the thieves along the road, who, finding that the dawn of the day was rapidly coming on, hastily deposited the money bags in a tank, intending at some future time to come again and remove them. Kalu noticed all this, gave up all further chase, and returned to the banker's house. When the household rose in the morning, it was soon found out what had happened during the night, and in very quick time a large concourse of friends and neighbors came round about the house, and condoled with the banker and his family at the loss they had incurred. There were offers of help on every hand. The police were sent in pursuit, and all that could be done was done to help the great banker of the city. While all this stir was going on, some of the friends noticed that the dog was much agitated, and was every now and then pulling at their garments. Many drove him off, and even the banker said, "As if I had not worry enough without being annoyed by a dog which does not belong to me." Then the banker told all his friends how he came to be possessed of the dog which belonged to a banjara. Shortly afterwards, an old man of the party, who knew the quick intelligence of these banjara dogs, said, "I think the dog knows more than we give him credit for. Look, he has come to me, and I shall go where he leads me." Soon others followed in the train, and the dog went knowingly along the road until he came to a dead stop near a tank, and went in. The old man said, "There is something here, depend on it. Let some young man go into the tank and make a search." This was done, and lo and behold, one bag of rupees was brought up out of the tank, and then another, until all had been recovered that the banker had lost. Then came shoutings and congratulations from all the people upon this wonderful discovery, and loud praises were lavished on the banjara's dog, who had found out the hiding place of the thieves. The banker himself was so overcome with delight that he gave presents to his friends all round, and then looking at Kalu, he said, "You faithful dog, you most blessed of all securities, I shall now write out a receipt in full for the money your master owes me, and tell him all that you have done, and you yourself shall be the bearer of the good news to him." This he did at once, and tied the receipt and letter onto the collar of the dog. And giving him a good feed, he dismissed him to his master with many smiles and blessings. Kalu, thus released by authority, and proud of having done his duty, ran off with great joy to seek his master. It was not long ere he saw his master hurriedly returning to the city, and running up to him he began to play round about him, and to show every sign of interest and affection. To Kalu's dismay, however, his master did not respond, but on the contrary was in great anger, and much disappointed that his hitherto faithful dog had, as he thought, broken his chain and run away from the banker's house, where he had lodged him as security. In a loud voice he said, "Kalu, you are a namak haram, traitor to your salt. Did I not tell you to wait till I released you? But instead you have disobeyed me, disgraced my name, and I can no longer have any confidence in you, and you are not fit to live." Whereupon he at once drew his sword from its scabbard, and at one cut severed poor Kalu's head from his body. "Wretched dog," he said, "this is the first time I have known you to deceive me, and you richly deserve your fate." Stooping down, his eye suddenly caught sight of a piece of paper tied to the dog's collar, and hastily opening it, he discovered to his utmost dismay that it was the banker's receipt in full for all the money that he owed him, and with the receipt was a letter, yes, a letter, describing how that the faithful dog had been the means of recovering all the property that some thieves had stolen from his house on the same night of his departure from the city. Plunged at once into the direst horror and grief at what he had done, and alone on the road with his faithful friend dead before his eyes, he could not resist the impulse, and seizing the open talwar he thrust it into his own body, and so perished by the side of his favorite. In this state they were found, and the story of the banjara and his dog, and the spot where they died, have ever since been treasured up in the memories of the people. Moral or nasihut: keep always a steel plate upon your temper, and a rotas bridle on your tongue, which you know is the strongest of all, and never give way to rash and impulsive acts. How an evil spirit was exorcised. Once upon a time there lived in the city of Peshawar, not very long ago, an old priest who had obtained a reputation for the power he possessed over malignant spirits. This priest usually had under his tuition 2 or 3 boys who were jinns, and to whom, as it pleased him from time to time, he communicated the knowledge he possessed of the black art. This old priest came to dwell in the village of Haji Shah, and took up his abode near to the Mohammedan mosque there. This mosque was in close proximity to the quarters of the Chuprasis, who, you know, are employed by the Sirkar or government in the suppression of salt smuggling. The chief of these Chuprasis had in his household a man of the name of Gopi, whose brother Shivedas was one of the Chuprasis, and lived with the others in the quarters provided for them. Shivedas was occasionally seized with violent fits, and when under their influence would rave like a maniac. All kinds of medicine had been tried to relieve him of the disorder, but it was all in vain, so at last his friends left him to himself, and only sought to prevent him doing any injury to himself when the fits came upon him. One day when Shivedas was returning to his quarters, he was again attacked by his old malady, and so violent was he on this occasion that it took 4 men to hold him down on his charpai or bed. His brother Gopi was at once sent for, and he found him in one of the severest fits he had ever had. On reaching his bedside, Shivedas cried out, "Save me! Gopi, save me!" Those round the bed and the 4 holding him said, "Why do you not do something for your brother?" He replied, "I have done all I can, but there is no cure for his disease." They said, "Then why do you not send for the priest here, who would soon expel this evil spirit which comes now and again to torment him?" Now Gopi did not believe in the power of the priest. At last, one of the Chuprasis went to the European chief's house and begged him to come up to the quarters to see what could be done. When he arrived there and saw the state that Shivedas was in, and Gopi his brother in such great distress, he said, "What can be done to relieve this man?" They all said, "Send for the priest, the old Peshawar man, and he will soon put him right." The chief said, "Well, do so if you like." They replied, "He will not come for us. He is a grumpy old man, but he will come for you." So the chief, to relieve the sufferer, and perhaps to satisfy his own curiosity, sent to ask the priest to come. In a short time he made his appearance, just when Shivedas was in one of his worst struggles, and looking at him for some time, he all of a sudden seemed to make up his mind, and drawing his Qur'an from his pocket, went close to the bedside, and called out, "Are you going to leave this man or not?" And a voice came from Shivedas, "No, I will not." Now many present heard the voice, but it was not the voice of Shivedas. The priest then asked for some rag, and many ran to get a piece of an old cloth, but he said, "No, this will not do, it must be blue rag." And in very quick time someone ran and brought a piece from the bazaar. When the priest took it into his hand, he called for a light, and then proceeded to burn it in the flame. Then, again advancing to the bedside, with the burning rag in one hand and the open Qur'an in the other, he called out in a louder tone than before, "Are you going to leave this man, or are you not? And if not, I will burn you out and all your generation." The same voice then uttered the words, "I will not leave him, and who are you?" The old priest then placed the smoldering rag to the nose of Shivedas, and again threatened the evil spirit. And then, to the astonishment of all, the voice said, "I will go away this time, if you will not trouble nor worry me." After this, Shivedas became still and tranquil, and went off into a profound sleep. Some hours afterwards, when he awoke, and was questioned as to what had occurred, he could call nothing to his remembrance. The Chuprasis believed that the evil spirit had been exorcised by the priest, and it is certainly true that Shivedas had no return of his fits, and I tell you this tale, for it is believed by many of us to this day. Bahadur Singh and the Blind Beggar. There lived once in the Punjab many years ago an old Sikh soldier who had gained much renown amongst his fellow countrymen for the many acts of bravery he had shown in the tribal wars that in those days used often to take place between the chieftains of the various independent states thereabout. We all know that the Sikhs belonged to a sect whose founder was one Nanak, who lived in the beginning of the 16th century, and that the word Sikh means in the Sanskrit language a disciple. This old soldier had for his first name the distinguished appellation of Bahadur, which in the Persian language means brave, so he was brave by name as well as by nature. At the time the incident occurred which I am now about to relate to you all, he had retired from active service, and had settled down on a small competence for a native in the village of Shumshabad. In this village, as indeed may be found in many towns and villages of Upper India, there was a little colony of blind men who subsisted on the alms of the benevolent, and they were generally to be found near the markets or bazaars, or along the thoroughfares leading to them. They had, moreover, a little settlement of their own situated on the confines of the town. One of these blind men at Shumshabad, a wizened-faced, attenuated old fellow, clad in poor garments and wearing a kumul or native blanket thrown about him, used to sit daily by the wayside begging, and ever in the same spot. This old blind man had the habit of calling out in a piteous tone, "Friends, have pity on the blind, and let him only feel and handle 100 gold mohurs, and he will be happy forever." Now, as few people who passed that way had even 1 coin of that value, his wish never seemed likely to be gratified, but he made a pile of money for all that, as the sequel of the story will show. Bahadur Singh used to hear this plaintive cry almost daily when he went to the bazaar, and being kind as well as brave, he often thought to himself, I should much like to satisfy that old blind man's wish, but I suppose I shall never be able to do so, for the little I have scarce supplies my own daily wants. So he contented himself with others round him, in casting a piece into the blind man's wallet. Months, nay, years had passed by, when Bahadur Singh had occasion to visit a sister who resided at some little distance from Shumshabad on the high road to Jhelum. Upon his return he stopped to rest near a tank, as natives often do, and upon the bank his eye caught sight of a small dark object, and when he had picked it up, he found it was very heavy. His curiosity was now greatly aroused, and what was his surprise on opening it but to discover that it was full of gold mohurs, and when he had counted them over, lo and behold, there were exactly 100. He was in quite a whirl of delight, and one might have thought that he would have kept the money and not disclosed the secret to anyone. But as there were just the very 100 gold mohurs that, by their feeling and handling, might make the old blind man of his village happy forever, the first idea that entered his head was to go straight to the spot where he knew he always asked for alms, to let him run his fingers over them. So, without any further ado, off he went, and upon reaching the old blind man, who was calling out in his usual strain, Bahadur Singh said, "Here, good old man, this is a lucky day for you, for I have brought you 100 gold mohurs to feel and to handle and to be happy forever." Whereupon Bahadur Singh handed the gold mohurs one by one into the old blind man's hand, and he handled them and put them one by one into his wallet, repeating after every one, "Oh, you blessed and good man." By the time the whole 100 had been counted out, a very considerable crowd began to collect, so that Bahadur Singh thought it better to recover his money and be off. He then asked the old man to give it back to him. But who would have thought it? The old villain set up quite another cry, howling and saying at the top of his voice, "Friends, help me! Help the poor blind man who is being robbed of his little all!" And laying fast hold of Bahadur Singh's dhoti or cloth, he made it appear as if some of his money had already been robbed from him. Of course the crowd took the side of the blind man, so it was all in vain for Bahadur Singh to try to get a hearing. And more than that, the crowd set upon him and would have thrashed him unmercifully had he not made his escape. So he hurriedly left the scene, and his money too. But he was in a fearful rage, and vowed he would have his revenge, and going by a back way to his hut, for he found he was being pursued, he reached it unperceived. Taking down his sword from the wall, he said to himself, "I know the place where the blind men live, and I know, too, that the old blind villain will be going home about dusk. I will lie in wait for him and cut him down." Bahadur Singh's heart, however, began to fail him. "For," he said, "is he not a blind man?" Yet the feelings of revenge had so worked him up that he was furious at being so cunningly deceived and robbed. In partial hiding he took up his post by the roadside, and he had not long to wait, for very soon the old blind villain hove in sight, tottering along and leaning on his staff. Bahadur Singh drew his sword from his scabbard and looked first at it, and then at the old blind villain who was drawing nearer and nearer to him. In an instant the brave feelings of his nature rose uppermost, for was he not Bahadur? And addressing his sword as the custom of Orientals often is, he said, "O sword, thou hast been with me in many an honorable fight, and shall I now tarnish thy fair fame by using thee thus? No, I ask pardon, and return you to your scabbard without a stain." And so saying, he let the blind man pass. But he determined upon following him, and if possible, to recover his money, whereupon he crept stealthily behind him and close upon his heels. And when the old blind villain arrived at his hut, Bahadur Singh saw him open the door, and before he had time to close and fasten it from the inside, the brave soldier had managed to slip in too, and quite unheard. Keeping very silent, he watched the old villain take off his kumul and his wallet, and then make his way to a corner of the hut. There he took up a tile flush with the floor, and removed from a hole beneath it a chatti, or earthenware vessel, in which he was proceeding to put in from his wallet the money he had collected during the day. Bahadur Singh saw his own 100 gold mohurs going in one by one, and then overheard the old blind villain say, "I have done well today. I have here 400 gold mohurs, and with this further 100, I shall have 500 gold mohurs, and who so rich as I?" And then he carefully returned the chatti and put back the tile, feeling it over and over again to be sure that it was in the right place. He then returned to his charpai or cot and sat down, apparently to think a bit. It was now Bahadur Singh's turn to try his luck on recovering his money, so moving very noiselessly, he crept to the money corner, lifted the tile, took out the chatti, and was getting back to a spot he had selected behind the charpai, when, as ill luck would have it, he struck against a shelf projecting from the wall, and the noise at once aroused the old blind villain, who rushed to the money corner, only to find that his store had vanished. He howled, he shouted at the top of his voice, he brandished about with his staff, smashing the water pots and deluging the hut with water, and it was only by great dexterity that Bahadur Singh could keep behind him, and so avoid coming in contact either with him or his staff. In a very short time, however, there came a knock at the door, and the old blind villain let in a stranger, who, to Bahadur Singh's relief, was, he noticed, also a blind man. The stranger called out, "What is all the noise about?" "Hi, hi, boo, boo," said the old blind villain. "All my money is gone, and I am ruined forever." "Your money gone?" he replied. "How can that be? Where did you put it?" Here, he said, pulling the stranger to the money corner. "But what a fool you were to keep it there. Why didn't you do as I always do? When I get enough together to make up a gold mohur, I sew it up into my turban." Bahadur Singh, hearing this at once, by a quick and quiet movement, reached forward and took off the turban of the stranger and put it aside, whereupon the stranger rushed at the old blind villain and said, "Why did you take my turban off, and where is it?" "I didn't," he replied, "but you must have done so, for there is no one else here, and you want to take my money now, do you?" So saying, he went for the old blind villain, knocked him down onto the slushy floor, and pummeled him until he cried hard for mercy. Bahadur Singh, with something like a smile at seeing his enemy punished, then quitted the hut, leaving them to fight it out. He took with him the chatti and the gold mohurs, and left the turban behind. He went straight to the village police, told the story, claimed only his own 100 gold mohurs, and left with them the 400 belonging to the old blind villain, which were there and then confiscated to the state. So this old blind villain not only lost his money, but got a terrible thrashing into the bargain, and this tale is often told in the hujras, or places of meeting of the village storytellers, as a capital instance of how best to retaliate, and how cleverly the biter was bit. This has been Magical Tales from Mystic India, oral tradition from the Indus, written by JFA McNair, Thomas Lambert Barlow, narrated by Susilo.